In this lesson, we are going to learn how to factor by grouping. When you factor by grouping, that means that you have four terms. And I'm just going to bring out the notes from when we factored out the greatest common factor. So whenever you have four terms, you use the grouping method. If you did not write that chart down in the first lesson, I highly recommend writing it down so you have it for this next lesson. So when you're factoring by grouping, you take out the greatest common factor 3 different times. So we're going to be looking at the problems number 71 through 76 in your book. I do not recommend doing the problems 77 through 80. This class is meant for basic teaching purposes. I am only supposed to be teaching you the basics. And those problems want you to actually rearrange the terms to make grouping work. So I'm giving you a heads up, please do not work any problems past 76. So when we take out the greatest common factor 3 times by grouping, the first thing you need to do is underline the first 2 terms and then underline the second 2 terms. So when we underline the first 2 terms, we have to take out the greatest common factor here. So the greatest common factor is A. We have to look at what do they have in common and only look as if that is all that you have, is the AB plus AC. So I'm going to take out an A. And when I take these A's out, you're left with that B minus C. And then over here, so I'm going to act as if this is all I have. So if I have a b squared minus bc, well, I can take out a b. And so when I do that, I'm left with b minus c. I get that because you have 2 b's, you take 1 away, so you're left with 1 b. And then those b's would cancel, leaving you with just a c. Now, this problem is a lot like problem numbers 58 through 62 in the factoring the greatest common factor method. So if you take those notes out, this might help you. So you look at these 2 terms here. Okay? Now this is your checkpoint. If you have the same thing inside both sets of parentheses, you've done everything right so far. Good job. So look, and what do each of these underlined parts have in common? You should say they both have a B minus C in common. So when you take that B minus C away, you're left with A plus B. And if you're wondering if the parentheses make a difference, yes, you must have those parentheses in there. So this is my final answer. So 72, the first thing I'm going to do is underline my first 2 terms, and then I'm going to underline my second 2 terms. So what I have in common on my first 2 terms is an A. So when I take those A's out, I'm left with x plus 2. And then when I look at these 2 terms, I can take out a B, and I'm left with x plus 2. So check, do you have the same thing in each set of parentheses? If you said yes, good job, that means that you're on the right track. Now you take the greatest common factor out between these 2 terms. So we can take out that x plus 2, and we're left with A plus B. And that's your answer. 73 is tricky. On 73, it's still done the same exact way. So on this first part, we can take out a 6r. Can't take out an s because this doesn't have an s in it. So I'm left with r plus 2s. And now here. So we have to act as if this is all that I can see. So there is a greatest common factor. We learned this in the last 4 problems of the greatest common factor lesson. So we cannot have a negative leading coefficient. This cannot be a negative. So I can pull out a -1. And when you do that, that changes the sign of both of these terms, which makes it an r plus 2s. Now we have the same thing inside of our set of parentheses, so we're doing good. So we're going to take out an r plus 2s. And when I take that from both of these terms, I'm left with 6r minus 1. And we're finished. So now on number 74, I can take out a 2m, which leaves me with n minus 2m. And then over here I can take out a 3, which leaves me with n minus 2m. So the greatest common factor here would be n minus 2m, because we have the same thing inside of our sets of parentheses, so we're doing good. So once I take that n minus 2m out, I'm left with 2m plus 3. Now moving on to number 75. So we have to look at each set. So I can take out b squared, which when I take that b squared out, I'm left with a minus 2. And then here I can take out a 3, and I'm left with a minus 2. So I have the same thing inside of each set of parentheses. So I have an a minus 2 I can pull out, and I'm left with b squared plus 3. Now for my final problem, I can take out an s squared. When I do that, I'm left with r squared minus 3. And then here, imagine that you can't see everything else, so I can take out a -2, which gives me r squared minus 3. Remember, when you take out a negative, that changes the sign of every term that you're considering. So I can pull out an r squared minus 3, and then I'm left with s squared minus 2. I hope this lesson on grouping has helped you. I wish you the best of luck.